Hello and welcome back to coverage here at GP Phoenix. I'm Marshall Sutcliffe in the booth with Eduardo Sajgalik. And down in the feature match area, we've got Cedric Phillips and Joe Lossett. Devoted Chord, we were wrong.
It's all good. So
he is not playing Miracles, as it turns out. The dream is dead. But we do get a chance to see maybe a little bit of a different look here, which is kind of cool.
Yeah, and although we don't see Jace the Mind Sculptor, this is a really spicy deck list. 2 main deck Fiery Justice, 2 Primal Commands. This is a value creature deck, looking to go off with the infinite combo of Devoted Druid and Vizier of Remedies, eventually getting one of the free Walking Ballistas to big, infinitely large, or large enough to kill Cedric Phillips. While Cedric is on a much more classic plan, get lands, throw Valakut Mountain, throw Valakut triggers at your opponents. And indeed, Cedric is playing the Bloodbraid Elf technology.
Nice. Cedric able to power out, potentially, a Bloodbraid Alpha. He's got a Secure Tribe Elder on turn 2, but Joe Lossett, no slouch on the mana either with that Birds of Paradise. White bordered, not great, but signed by Mark Poole, so we'll give him a break.
I think the sign card devotes a specific type of fan, but
it does.
Interestingly here, this kind of reminds me of some old matches where both players are shuffling each other's decks while actions are taking place to speed things up a bit. And here you can just see mana creatures on every side. Double Bird of Paradise, Devoted Druid against the Secure Tribe Elder.
Oh yeah.
And yeah, here Cedric has access in his deck list to 2 Sweltering Suns. And I would put Joe as a heavy favorite if Cedric can't get one of those 2 Sweltering Suns or free Lightning Bolts to deal with that Devoted Druid. Essentially, Cedric's plan is very consistent and reliable, but Joe's is just faster. So Cedric really needs to be able to interact with Joe's plan here to have a chance to win this game.
Yeah, one of the features of the Scapeshift deck is that it can be remarkably consistent at deploying its game plan, but it's not particularly fast.
Yeah,
you're not getting turn 4 wins off of it. You know, it's very difficult to do that, but it will march its way up to usually 7 lands and do its thing pretty darn consistently. But if this Naya core deck can just go off beforehand, then it could just simply outrace Cedric Phillips here.
Yes, and there's a high chance that the core deck just is faster than the Scapeshift deck on average. If both players have access to their ideal plans, the core deck will get there a lot faster. Usually the Scapeshift deck aims to do turn 4 Primeval Titan and win on turn 5. Sometimes you can get that turn 4 win, and it's a little hard though. Like, it involves your opponent damaging themselves in the perfect draw into a Scapeshift. It can happen, but normally Scapeshift is a turn 5 deck. Where it's really strong though is Cedric is banking on meeting a lot of Jund at the top tables, similar to what we've seen in the Magic Online Championship and at Grand Prix Madrid, and that's where the Scapeshift deck shines, because the Jund decks are not aggressive enough to fight the Scapeshift deck, and the disruption doesn't usually work. So that's where Scapeshift wants to position itself. But its cards to interact with the core deck, it does have the chance to do so because it's playing red mana, disruption in the form of Lightning Bolt, Sweltering Sun, and the sideboard Anger of the Gods. But if Cedric doesn't have these cards, it makes Joe is very favored essentially when you don't see those cards.
Another Secure Tribe Elder here for Cedric Phillips. He has left up a dual land before passing the turn back to Joe. We'll see what Joe has. Looks like Eternal Witness, just to get back a Wooded Foothills. He's going to play it.
Yeah.
Well, this isn't great. This is a very, very fair look here from Joe Lossett.
Yeah, that's actually a pretty spot-on assessment. If your opponent gets a land with Eternal Witness, they're probably, because Joe had access to Devoted Druid and 2 birds, more than enough mana to get a Vizier.
Wow.
With a court.
Cedric has to just be over the moon about this. I mean, basically Joe has played 3 0-power creatures and 2 2-power creatures. That's it. That's what he's, in Modern, you're not getting the job done. And Cedric, ostensibly, Joe doesn't have much of, by way of interaction here as well, right? Like, Cedric can just kind of do his thing.
Right. Joe's interaction is essentially to kill Cedric before Cedric's plan works.
Yeah, that
and
ain't
Joe's
happening.
deck, not in this game, but I think Joe's deck is well lined up against Cedric's in a goldfish vacuum. Essentially, if both players do their plan, Joe should be ahead. However,
you mean on average?
On average, yeah.
'Cause
However,
that certainly didn't happen here, did it?
Right. The lack of access to a Cord or a Vizier or a Dustwatch Recruiter, a card to essentially, go a little over the top or get your combo means that Joe is falling behind. He drew cards that are not ideal in this matchup. Like Fiery Justice is amazing if you're facing Mirrors or if you're facing Affinity. That's definitely where it's incredible. But in this scenario, unfortunately, it's not where you want it.
So here's land number 7 for Cedric, though. You'll look, and Joe is at 19 life. So Cedric may need another turn here to actually get Joe dead. Let's see what he's got lined up, though.
If Cedric is tapping that mountain, that third mountain, it seems like the most likely play. Yes, Bloodbraid Elf. The second green would have worried me for a Scapeshift, but Bloodbraid Elf here, just let's spin and see what we get.
And he can't kill him with Scapeshift yet anyway, right?
Right, because Joe decided is not cracking his fetch land because that would be
very careful.
Yes. However, it's not very far off. A Titan would have been lethal for next turn, pretty much. But more importantly, a Titan would have allowed Cedric to start firing off Valakut triggers.
Kill the Devoted Druid?
Yeah, although that might be possible. There are already 5 mountains in play.
Okay.
And there is an Explorer that triggered. So, this Farseek already gets to kill the Devoted Druid here.
And that's a key, right? Because isn't that the only way that Cedric realistically loses from this point is to get comboed off somehow?
Yes. Devoted Druid doesn't have haste. So, if Cedric kills the Devoted Druid, Joe can't really combo off with the current setup. So, as long as Cedric has a Titan, a Scapeshift in hand, or even enough lands to just kill those birds and get enough board control so that he has time to go over the top, then for me, Cedric should take down this game, barring one of the most ludicrous draws. Since after all, apart from another basic forest in his deck, basically everything that Cedric owns either deals damage in some form. It's it's a Sweltering Suns, it's a Summoner's Pact for Titan, it's a Mountain for a Lightning Bolt effect. So Cedric should be very far ahead here. Yeah. I mean, I want to see ways that Joe could win this game, but unfortunately, Joe doesn't have enough of a board presence, and there's no real way for Joe to kind of come back over the top here because Joe was lacking Court of Calling. And as far as I can tell, he's not actually running Collected Company. So it's very hard for Joe to be ahead on cards. There's a lot of selection, but the only way he can be ahead is a Tireless Tracker or Primal Command on land plus searching. But it seems like Joe is going to be really far behind in this game.
Well, he's getting rowdy, just doing what he's got to do. Starts attacking.
Yeah.
But he's in bad position, and he knows it as well.
Yeah, based on Joe's...
This is going to be another Eternal Witness, and he can start looping them together. He's got a Scavenging Ooze as well. Fine. It's just Cedric Phillips doesn't need a whole lot, a Primeval Titan or a Scapeshift.
Yeah.
And he's going to have firm control of this game, if not just outright win it on the spot.
Yeah, I mean, at this point...
He's also playing 2 Summoner's Packs as well. To go along with 4 Primeval Titan in the deck and 4 Scapeshift. So that's 10 outs right there.
Yeah, and this is what basically the Eternal Witness getting back the Witness here. Joe is basically going on, okay, I can't win if you have Scapeshift or Titan. This is just over.
Right.
So what I'm going to aim to do is make sure that you cannot stop my pressure with creatures or it's a little difficult. So that your subpar draws of just, say, a Lightning Bolt, I can beat because you can't deal with my creatures. As effectively, you can't deal with my pressure. So Joe is still far behind, but he's going for what he believes is his best plan, and I believe I'm going to have a tendency to agree here, which is I'll just value my creatures so that I prefer dealing 2 or 4 damage a turn guaranteed. Although there's almost no chance of me winning, this is probably still my best line.
Search for Tomorrow is going to get another trigger from a Valakut here, and it looks like Scavenging Ooze is going to be the recipient of those 3 damage.
Yeah.
Still not it's not the win. It's not like Cedric just wins on the spot with a search for tomorrow. So Joe says, well, maybe I get to just keep chipping away. Seems unlikely from this point, but it's starting to become apparent that Cedric does not have the win in hand.
Right. One thing to keep in mind is because Cedric, on average, will draw the equivalent of a lightning bolt every turn, it means that Joe is probably locked to dealing 4 damage a turn. So essentially for Joe to win, he does have access to 5 mana, so it is possible for him to double fret, essentially playing 2 cards a turn. But he's in a situation where he's most likely going to deal 4 damage a turn, maybe 6 if he's lucky. But because of that, Cedric probably has 4 turns to, I guess with this attack, 3 turns to draw one of the winning cards in the deck. But even something like this.
What does Cedric have in his hand? What would he not play here?
I saw a lightning bolt. Which,
okay, he's just holding on to it.
Yeah, just in case he draws forest and he wants to destroy, like, I guess, a devoted druid, or if Joe goes for 2 relevant threats in a turn, then at least Cedric has the option to go land plus bolt and deal with both. Since the voice is not really something that Cedric can kill efficiently, it would just be awful for him.
It's just better to leave it as a 2/2 indefinitely.
Exactly.
Cedric's down to 12. And there's a tireless tracker, but no land drop here for Joe Lossett. So he's just continuing to add vanilla power to the board. That has been the name of the game for him. And so far, he does have Cedric down to 12. What is going on here? Cedric needs to find one of these 10 options to really just slam the door on this game.
Yeah, and even though Cedric drew a Wooded Foothills this turn, he still should be ahead. Essentially killing the tracker here, still taking potentially 4 damage. Essentially trying to get to draw that card, buying time until he can draw one of those key cards you mentioned earlier, the Summoner's Pact, the Primeval Titan, the Scapeshift. In truth, Joe is enacting the Plan B aspect of the Naya Court deck. Basically, you don't get your combo. That's okay. Just play creatures and value out your opponent. But that tends to be at its worst against a deck like Scapeshift because they tend to just be able to go over the top. So it's not like usually chip damage like this shouldn't work. But if Cedric keeps bricking turn after turn, Joe keeps dealing in that chip damage. And if I saw that lightning bolt in Cedric's hand correctly, I potentially would have fired it off on the Eternal Witness a little earlier. I know Joe can loop all this again and again, but it's important to deal with this pressure.
Just because he is taking a significant amount of damage now, even if it's been the slowest, fairest
right.
draw in the history of Modern, Cedric has done a good job of building up his mana base, but has just not been able to find the hammer here to just seal up this game, though he is extremely close to doing so. With a lot of outs in the library, can Cedric find a way to finish this game off, or is he going to lose to these things? It feels like he can't lose either way because, as you mentioned, he's effectively drawing a lightning bolt to turn any land effectively as a lightning bolt, and he could just manage the board. But Joe has a pretty reasonable board. And there it is, Scapeshift up top for Cedric Phillips. He found it finally. A little overdue for old Cedric here, but he got there.
Took some time. But yeah, essentially, one interesting thing if Cedric hadn't drawn the Scapeshift here is he probably would have been forced to bolt the Witness here to give himself an out of drawing away to kill all the creatures, since going to 4 and drawing into a Sweltering Suns would have been able to kill off all the creatures except the Voice token. And at 4 life, he wouldn't die from the Voice token, but most likely, but at 2 he would. So I kind of think that Cedric should have bolted the Witness a little earlier to give himself the absolute best chance. So like changing your like 85-90% to win to 95-96. But he was still a very big favorite and eventually drew to his out here. So yeah, Joe went for the plan that was essentially the only plan given to him at this point. And
what a flat draw from Joe Lossett, though, right? I mean, he didn't have anything. He didn't have anything good, right? Like, of course we didn't see the combo go off. Okay, fair enough. It doesn't always get to do that, but, like, no Chord of Calling, right? We didn't get to see him, like, search up anything to do any type of combo-y stuff at all. It was just kind of a flat draw for him, all told.
Right, and I think that comes to the decision to not run Collected Company.
Yeah, so he's not running into this deck. What gives? This would, you look at these cards and you'd think perfect deck for Collected Company, but he doesn't have it.
Right, and he decided to run instead 2 copies of Fiery Dashes and 2 copies of Primal Command. So probably Joe wanted to have a better ability to interact with his opponent's side of the board and cut down on these essentially value cards. I'm not sure about that deck building decision, since Collected Company for me is by far one of the most powerful cards you can have access to in Modern if you play one of these value creature decks.
Totally.
So I'm not 100% convinced about the decision. Especially since Joe is not running many creatures that cost more than 3 mana, apart from the 2 Obstinate Baloffs, which are maybe tech choice against Jund, essentially catching people off guard. So if people plus with Liliana, which is very common against these core decks, since usually sacrificing is going to do the job.
By the way, Cedric finally just won. We got to break down Joe's entire deck list here while Cedric counted. He says, is this more than 17? Joe said, it's a lot more than 17. And Cedric says, yeah, we did it. So Cedric Phillips picks up game number 1 with his Scapeshift list against Joe. Of course, these guys know each other very well. Cedric, longtime commentator on the Star City Games circuit, and Joe Lossett has crushed that circuit for quite a long time.
Yes, but
wow,
yeah,
that was a judge call and a half back there, wasn't it? My goodness.
It's all about the energy. That says as far as you can tell. But
I'll tell you what, a judge will come over there.
But yeah, but one interesting thing here is Joe is prepared for those big mana decks. So game 1 usually
he is prepared for a big mana deck like this.
Yeah. So game 1 he can combo off, but game 2 and 3 he has access to free Crumble to Dust.
Oh, very nice.
If you want a piece of technology.
So what do you aim at it? If you can hit a Valakut?
Yeah, that would be what I target.
But what if he doesn't expose a Valakut to it?
Then it gets
Can you
harder.
do anything about it? Like, he's got 14 mountains, or cards that count as mountains in the deck.
Right.
Can you attack on that axis at all?
Realistically,
no, right?
not really.
Not really. You can only get it up to 4.
Yeah, the real you want to hit Valakut. The only time you would crumble, say, a Stomping Ground would be that you essentially look at Cedric's mana base and you go like, I really want to Stone Rain this turn. I really want the effect Stone Rain.
Yeah. And that is something that you'll see occasionally in the other Scapeshift builds, primarily the ones that play blue, because they actually can find themselves a little bit short on mountains, but this one doesn't have that problem.
Right, yeah. Against the blue versions, they usually only run 2 basic mountains, 4 Steam Vents, 4 Stomping Grounds. So hitting one of those dual lands usually means they're down to 6, which means that any mountain they draw has to be A, played, and B, deals 3 less damage when comboing off.
Yeah.
Basically, they also have 2 Valakuts, so it's a lot harder to hit a Valakut. So that's when you'll see that it's much more likely against the blue versions to hit those dual lands, because A, they've only played 2 Valakuts on average, and they have much fewer. They have fewer mountains, so it's totally okay to go for that plan. But here, Joe is targeting Valakut. That said, Cedric isn't necessarily going to expect the Crumble to Dust, so he's going to probably just run into it, and I'm very pro running. If I have a Valakut in Scapeshift, playing it on turn 1 because it's a top land, and I want to make sure I get that out of the way when it's easy. So this is actually playing into the Crumble to Dust, although game 3 should be interesting since Cedric will play very, very hard around it.
Now, I am curious, why do you think that Cedric wouldn't consider a card like Crumble to Dust? Is it because the color considerations here? I mean, if you look at Joe's deck list, he's heavily green-white. Right, sure. He's effectively splashing red for Fiery Justice, and then maybe something out of the board like Crumble to Dust.
I'm trying to remember the lands we saw in game 1, but we saw Wooded Foothills.
Yes,
and Wooded Foothills would. Yeah.
So how much of that is a clue for Cedric?
It's very rare for one of these decks to be exactly 2 colors. So they'll always run Whipswept Heath, but usually these combo-ish decks with Devoted Druid will run Verdant Catacombs for black cards. So I think Cedric can put Joe Lossett on red mana, but it's very hard from there to go, okay, he's on red mana, so he could run Crumble to Dust, and then from there to go, okay, maybe he does figure that out, but then he maybe runs a copy or 2.
1, yeah. He's got 3 of them in his sideboard. Joe is packing the big heat here for Valakut.
Yeah.
Now, I am also curious, Eduardo, if you're in Cedric's seat, and let's say Joe's grabs his sideboard and goes, oops, and drops it on the table, and then there's, boom, right in front of you, 3 Crumble to Dust, and those are coming in. What can Cedric actually do to play around it? Does he have to sandbag the Valakuts?
That's the easiest method, yeah. Sandbag the Valakut.
Sounds awkward.
It's fine. I think the main plan from Cedric, though, board in that Anger of the Gods and board in those 2 Tireless Trackers and 2 Fractus to kind of give himself a value plan. I would probably board out the 2 Summoner's Pact and something like a Scapeshift. You don't need to focus as much on your core game plan, since Joe on the play is going to be much faster, so you really need to draw those Lightning Bolts and Angers. Something like Tireless Tracker can really help you there.
Okay.
Especially since Joe should have no answer to it. What Joe's bringing in here is probably the Mind Sensor and the free Crumble to Dust. There's not really much else. He's going to lose the 2 Fiery Justice and probably shave the 2 Obstinate Baloffs, and then that's the rest of the deck seems okay here. As for Cedric, probably shave some of the combo pieces that don't interact well with Bloodbraid, like the Summoner's Pact, the Scapeshift, something like that. Board in the Anger and board in Tireless Tracker, and maybe the Fractus might not be the greatest, I guess. So he probably will otherwise stick to his main core game plan.
Mulligan here from Joe Lossett. Cedric has kept his, though, but he's a... You like to see this as well. You can see the players are having a big chat here. They're taking a minute to get caught up. How you been? How are things?
Yeah, and a mulligan here is totally fine for Joe. He's essentially a combo deck, so a lot of his cards have very disparate value. Essentially, some cards are worth a lot more than others.
Good word. Very good word.
Hopefully pronounced well there.
Yeah, we say disparate, but whatever.
That's fine. But yeah, here, interestingly, the Scry Wheel in Modern is always kind of funny because you play so many fetch lands. So when you're on the play in Scry, sometimes it's kind of, okay, well, I guess I'll play this fetch land and no 1-drop. But in Joe's deck, that's not really an option. So Joe does get a lot less value out of his Scries with his deck on average on the play.
Let's see if Joe finds a keeper here on 6. He does. He sees Court of Calling on the top of his library. Now, we've been talking about the combo a fair bit here, Eduardo, but we haven't actually outlined it, have we?
We had just to continue on that, like for those that are kind of joining in, the combo, Devoted Druid, essentially 0/2. You can put a counter on it to untap it. It produces green mana. There you go. You get to see the card in play. If Joe can combine that with the card Vizier Remedies, which he only has 1 copy, but he has 4 courts, so effectively 5, he can essentially, once the Vizier and the Devoted Druid are in play, essentially the counter that the Devoted Druid puts on itself just doesn't happen because the Vizier prevents it. So that's infinite green mana, and from there, you can either cord or play a Dustwatch Recruiter that gets you, with that infinite mana, you get every creature in your deck. One of those is Walking Ballista. The Walking Ballista gets you.
Yeah, and then you can make infinite mana for the Walking Ballista. And it is important, I think, to outline those type of combos because these, like you said, normally Obzon-style decks. Ooh, Sweltering Suns here from Cedric Phillips. Let's just take a little pause there and watch the board state go away for Joe Lossett. A big play for Phillips. He's already up a game anyway. Yeah. Yikes, what a setback. Oh, no, is this going to be a Walking Ballista for 1? It is. Can't be what Joe wants to do here. He's missing his land drop, too.
Yeah. Joe's hand is very awkward and very clunky.
You see Cedric just rolled up his sleeves. He's like, all right.
Let's get this done.
Yeah.
But, yeah, no, body language analysis.
Yeah, body language says Joe unhappy, Cedric thrilled.
Yes, the missed land drop from Joe on 2 turns. Plus Cedric getting that key Sweltering Suns in.
Wow, that was a beating. Cedric Phillips on the other side just putting it down now. Now, he does need to still continue this mana development, and he's doing that with a search for tomorrow.
Yeah.
Does he have a land and maybe even a 2-drop? Oh, he does. Look at this. He's going to be able to untap with 6 lands. We could see Primeval Titan next turn.
Yeah, just get the game plan enacted. It's all good.
Land off the top, though, for Lossett says, okay, maybe he could do something. Wow, he kept a Baloth in.
Yeah, that was actually something I was going to point out while Joe fetches his land. Is essentially, I didn't think Baloth would be that great in this matchup. But that said, the reason Joe probably kept it in is because it is impervious to Anger of the Gods and Sweltering Suns because of the 4 toughness. So he probably kept it in as kind of a mid-range threat that doesn't get swept away.
So it went from bad to like okay, though, right? Because you're never getting it discarded. You're never getting that extra value. But it's like fine.
It's a 4/4 for 4. That's essentially its core role.
Good, yeah. I mean, I understand it survives a sweeper, but
yeah,
boy, Cedric probably would be fine if you're like, hey, I'm going to play an Obstinate Baloth. He's like, sure, knock yourself out. I'll be over here doing broken stuff.
Yeah, probably Joe boarded out 2 Walking Ballista since that card is also pretty weak in the matchup. So that's the most likely scenario. The 2 Fiery Justice and the 2 Walking Ballistas. The Bailoff is probably like just the least, like the 59, 60th card that you kind of have to keep in. But yeah, here Cedric's game plan is just in full swing. If Cedric has one of his big cards like a Scapeshift or a Primeval Titan, with Joe being tapped out and with no possibility of Joe kind of comboing off, Cedric is, if he has one of these key cards, he's just going to like win the game like as soon as he untaps. But yeah. Essentially, the Scapeshift deck becomes extremely good when your Lightning Bolts are very good interaction cards. Because when your Lightning Bolts can interact with your opponent's combo deck, normally combo is not a good matchup for Scapeshift, but when Lightning Bolt becomes your kind of counterspell, then everything goes well. And that's the key, is that Cedric has access to no real dead cards in the game 1 and in game 2. So I'd say like Cedric is slightly favored if he gets to interact with Joe. It just was that in game 1, Joe didn't have the combo at all. So that gave Cedric time. That's actually what happened. He didn't have interaction, but Joe wasn't winning. And Cedric's more consistent game plan eventually took over.
Ooh. Oh, he has Scapeshift right now. Now, Lossett is sitting on 19 life, but that is 8 lands on the battlefield for Cedric. And that's going to be game. Cedric Phillips, 2-0 over Joe Lossett. Joe with that kind of anemic first game draw, and then this time just didn't find his key disruption spell with the Crumble to Dust. And Cedric Phillips was able to pretty easily win that game off of the back of the Sweltering Suns there.
Yeah, the Sweltering Suns with the missed land drop means that Joe just doesn't have access to mana. Then Cedric got to enact his game plan. It was really that easy here.
Yeah, pretty straightforward win there. And that's going to put Cedric at 3-0 already. So nice start for Cedric. Of course, I think he has 2 buys. I would assume at least 1 buy. So, a good start for Cedric Phillips. Joe Lossett's going to have to saddle back up here and try to find maybe a little bit more explosive draws from his deck. His deck didn't really cooperate with him there. And, he did tune his deck in a way that he doesn't have those over-the-top draws quite as often by cutting those collected companies.
Yeah, basically, Joe engineered his deck, more copies of Ballista, more copies of Fiery Justice to be more interactive with small creature decks. And it kind of punished him in this matchup because this was a big mana deck. Yeah. So, like, these cards like Fiery Justice, extra Walking Ballistas, they're just not good in this matchup. Means more dead draws. And you could see it. If that Fiery Justice in his hand in game 1 was a collected company, he could end of turn collected company against Cedric and potentially just pull ahead that way.
Yeah, and that's the kind of thing that can happen. All right, well, it sounds like we've got an interview lined up down in the thing. Hey, Cedric, what's up, buddy? It's Marshall and Eduardo in the booth. Nice win there.
Thanks, Marshall. I appreciate it. Hey, Eduardo, how are you?
Yeah, good. It was awesome seeing the games.
Yeah, so that first game was kind of interesting because you got to do the thing that you wanted to do. Well, he did some pretty fair stuff, but then you just couldn't find that big finisher at the end.
Yeah, obviously looking for a Titan Scapeshift or Summoner's Pact to kind of finish the game off, hoping that Joe never really was able to string anything together. Like you mentioned, Marshall, he was definitely playing like a fair game with Witnesses and Trackers and like Voice of Resurgence, a bunch of cards that ultimately aren't particularly good. Yeah. So, just hoping he doesn't draw company and I eventually draw Scapeshift, which I did, so that's good.
We were kind of laughing in the booth because it was like 2-2 for 2. You're like, okay. He's like, another 2-2 for 2. You're like, sure. He's like 2-2 for 3. You're like, yes.
Yeah. At that point, I can start like firing off the bolt and like the fetch land and stuff like that to like kind of whittle away his creatures. But then I'm losing some number of mountains and stuff like that, and like my Sweltering Suns are losing some equity. So, yeah, if Voice of Resurgence wants to hang out, that's cool. That's fine.
Now, we also noticed that you and Joe were having a lot of chat between you. You guys have been in a lot of the same buildings at the same time for Star City Games events. How close are you with Joe?
Pretty close. Joe's transitioned over to the GP circuit and the Pro Tour circuit. We were actually talking about how he did. He had 31 points last year, so he just came up short of gold, but still that's obviously a really, really good season. Yeah. And I've covered a ton of Joe's matches slowly. He's right here, that's why I said that. I've covered a lot of Joe's matches playing Legacy when he was playing Miracles, probably the best Miracles player in the world. So sure. I know Joe really well. I've covered his matches for like 4 years, so it's always good to play against him. We've actually had some pretty fun battles in Legacy over time as well. So it's good to see him. I haven't seen him for a little little while.
Now, what about for you, right? You're a busy guy. I mean, I know what it's like traveling around for the Magic tournaments and doing the coverage all the time. But, you do pop up at a GP pretty often. Do you have goals, like, for Pro Magic? Where are you at with it?
I mean, goals, not really. I mean, I always want to play in Pro Tours. That's ultimately what I want to do. Grand Prix are an avenue for that. Magic Online's also an avenue for that. Naturally, like you mentioned, I travel a lot, and I have 2 jobs, so time is not something I have a lot of. But I was just in Reno for a trade show convention. Reno is an hour-and-a-half flight from here, so it made sense.
Nice.
And fortunately for me, I think Scapeshift is really well, Titan Shift is really well positioned, and it's not that hard to play. So, when something when things kind of fall into place like that, I'm going to cross my fingers. Hopefully, I get good matchups. Draw Scapeshift when I need to, like I did in Game 1, and we'll see how the chips fall.
Very nice, Cedric. Always good to see you out here at the GP level, and a great start for you, 3-0. Keep running it up.
Thanks, Marshall. Thanks, Eduardo. Good luck to you guys.
Take care.
Great stuff from Cedric down there. He does. You can't take the grind out. He shows up at GPs whenever he reasonably can, and that's not that often. I mean, like I said, him and I, we both live up in Seattle. We live similar lifestyle. It's hard to find time to play GPs. It's also hard to just say, I could go play in this one, but then I have to get on an airplane, and it's on a weekend when I could stay home. It's tempting to do so, but Cedric, he's got that competitive spirit. He wants to come out and grind.
Seeing him at the Pro Tour was great, actually.
Yeah.
We were in Bilbao and queuing up in the same line.
There you go.
It's good to see him come back. He, I think he was competitive. Back when I was playing, and I think it was 2009. I think he was the one that had that really top performance with Kifkin showing.
He did. He made a top 8. Yeah.
And he's not afraid to take the deck that other people dismiss as easy to play, like White Weenie or Scapeshift.
If he thinks it's well positioned, he'll jam.
And I agree with his decision to run the Titan Shift deck with Blood Raid. I think it's very well positioned, especially at the top tables. And I think that people underestimate that those deck choices really matter in a field like this. It's totally you could argue, okay, you just play your lands and ramp, whatever. But honestly, I would rather be in a spot like Cedric's where I know what I'm doing, I know what my game plan is, and when I get to the top tables, playing for that top 8, playing for that trophy, I know my matchup is great because they're playing the wrong Blood Braid Elf deck against me.
Yeah, that's right. All right, well, that's going to do it for our live coverage here. We're going to take a short break. When we come back, we'll have Time Walk from Phoenix. Don't go anywhere. Hello there, welcome back to the booth here at GP Phoenix. I'm Marshall Sutcliffe, that's Eduardo Sajgalik. We're in the Pro Show. Thank you so much for joining us. This is where we unleash some of the best players in the world onto our unsuspecting field of players here. We're playing Modern. We've already seen Cedric, Phillips, and Joe Lossett battle, but we've got Time Walk Magic lined up for you now, so why don't we head on down to that. And it looks like we've got David Ochoa versus Gary Wong, and they're ready to face off. Down in the feature match area, Grixis Shadow in the hands of the Ochoa. Gary Wong is on red-green Eldrazi. Now, is this the deck, Eduardo, the Eldrazi deck that runs the Obligator and the Bloodbraid Elf and stuff like that?
Well, it does. Bloodbraid Elf wasn't quite legal when this deck won GP Lyon.
Mm-hmm.
But yes.
Got a little bump.
It was like a day off. It's like
actually, it was literally a day, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
But yeah, Bloodbraid Elf, a natural slot into an aggressive red-green deck. Essentially, getting a Bloodbraid Elf into Matter Reshaper, that's value, and that's very good against the kind of mid-range tempo deck that is Grixis Shadow.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, Grixis Shadow is not one that gets to play with like these new toys. You can sometimes play a Jace the Mind Sculptor, but here David Ochoa is on a very classical Death Shadow list. So if you've seen a Death Shadow list in the past, you can believe that David's running it. The main innovation he's running, though, the 4 Mishra's Bauble, something that came out of Pro Tour Rivals of Ixalan. Both myself and Ben Freeman run them. They just make the deck a lot smoother. And he's making the correct decision, unlike me, to run 4 Anglers rather than a Tassiger and Free.
All right, we see a Inquisition of Kozilek here from David Ochoa, and he sees a hand of Reality Smasher, Bloodbraid Elf, Cavern. Can't take those. But he can take a Mind Stone, or what is that other mana rock called? I always forget that.
Talisman of Impulse.
Thank you, those talismans. That's right.
You didn't play enough Mirrodin Limited?
No, I didn't play any.
That was one of my first limited
then.
sets.
Yeah,
it's great.
I did play it once on a Magic cruise. Luis was there.
Oh, I remember those cruises.
Yeah, and he was like, "Hey, do you want to play this?" I think we did Heads Up Sealed or something. I can't remember. Maybe it was just Draft. And he played this stupid slug card against me.
Molten Slug.
Molder Slug, I think it's called.
Oh my gosh! Yeah.
And I'm like, "What does that do?" And he just started laughing.
It wins the game. That's what it does.
He crushed me with it. That was also the last time I've drafted Mirrodin.
Yeah. But by the you notice, by the way, the Bauble here randomly got sacked at some point, probably before the fetch land, so David could choose whether to draw the card with Street Ray for fetch. But something we kind of missed out on here, and why Inquisition of Kozilek's stock has really gone down over time, is that hand. Basically, when he Inquisitions Gary, he can only take a subsection of cards. Imagine if Gary's hand was later in the game and just Reality Smasher Bloodbraid. You just don't hit. And because of Bloodbraid Elf, Inquisition of Kozilek has become a lot worse,
right?
On average. So Thoughtseize,
I mean, it doesn't take Jace or Bloodbraid Elf.
Oh, it's horrible.
Welcome to New Modern, right?
Yeah. Right, and that's why you see people. I mean, in Grixis Shadow, you run 4 Thoughtseize anyways because of the synergy with the deck. But that's also why you see Jund decks run before they kind of ran a free split to not lose too much life. And there weren't that many 4-drops in the format. But with Bloodbraid Elf and Jace entering, you're going to see a lot more Thoughtseize than Inquisition down the line. Essentially for this reason. When you look at your opponent's hand and you're like, I really would like to take this Bloodbraid Elf, but I can't. And yeah, when David sees Gary's hand and basically there's 2 mana producers in Talisman and Mind Stone, he knows he has to take one, but it's just oh my gosh, this is a really strong draw here.
Thought Not Seer from Gary Wong. Didn't know that was coming. Let's see. Now he is facing down a 5/5 Gurmag Angler. So David is still, deploying his game plan. But let's take a look at his hand from Ochoa. He's got Fatal Push Thoughtseize. He's also got another Gurmag Angler. That one looks a little more stuck in hand. A Snapcaster Mage, and he has the Death's Shadow, though he's not quite in a position to cast it.
Yeah, this is a really difficult decision on the Thought Not Seer. I think the Angler is probably the only one I would easily exclude, but every other card has an argument. The Snapcaster Mage down the line for value. The Fatal Push, David doesn't have an activator, but if he top stacks a fetch land or a Mistress Bottle, then he gets to attack, draw a card, he gets himself really far in
Imagine
front.
if it's a fetch land, that also turns on
Yeah, he basically goes to go Fatal Push, Thoughtseize, Death Shadow. And
oh my god.
Yeah, and like invalidating most of Gary's plays. The Thoughtseize is probably another card you can leave because while it synergizes with the Death Shadow, although he does take it here.
I guess he just wants to set up for the next turn Bloodbraid Elf.
He does have a Reality Smasher and Bloodbraid Elf, so I was less of a fan of the take here. I think here I would have taken the Death Shadow, essentially trying to get rid of David's threats right now. But I think taking the Thoughtseize, if David doesn't draw a fetch land, kind of does that
This
anyways.
is kind of a gamble, right?
Yeah.
Like he's just saying, okay, don't draw fetch. Because if he doesn't, then he's actually in pretty decent shape here. Lining up maybe a Reality Smasher next turn, depending on if he hits a land.
Yeah, and the fact that David like passed here for his music to Gary's ears, like that was like the turn. Essentially, if David drew a fetch land, that would have been critical. But even a Mistress Bauble, drawing another card, could have been enough to push David over the top. But yeah.
And here we go. Bloodbraid Elf goes on the stack. Welcome back to the format BBE. Oh boy, an Eldrazi Obligator too. This is a lot of damage.
Yeah, and this is where a lot of things get very interesting.
Oh.
Why did David attack here, knowing that Gary has access to Bloodbraid Elf and Reality Smasher?
Well,
also, the thing for Gary is, like, do I really want to put David down that low? Because I know he still has a Death Shadow.
Yeah.
And that was why I was kind of a fan of taking it, is then your attacks become a lot easier because you know your opponent can't play a very cheap creature. And yeah, David wisely runs out the Snapcaster Mage here. It's okay to take some damage because next turn, this is going to put David to 6, which means he's going to have access to a Death Shadow. And something else that Gary we should have paid attention to when I talk about all these lines of play is David has access to Steam Events, not triple black mana.
Right.
If he had drawn a fetch land. So I think here, because of that, I didn't like the Thoughtseize take. Because David is going to be able to cast a Death Shadow eventually, going to be able to cast that Fatal Push eventually, and they're going to have value. And here,
he just drew a Mistress Bauble, so now all of a sudden he is in line. Now he can't do both.
He can basically go Bauble, Fatal Push. So one
Kill
thing.
Thought-Knot.
So yeah, and then draw a card. He has no shuffle effects, so he might as well look at Gary's top card here. But yeah, the other line is you just make a 6/6, which blanks Reality Smasher. Gary needs an Obligator to kill it. Although I really love the interaction of Obligator versus the Death Shadow decks. Essentially, if you steal it, if you're at a low enough life total, it kills them, or otherwise it just dies.
That's great. That is great.
Yeah.
Right back at you, Death Shadow.
Yeah, I love matchups like these. Like, creature-based matchups with Death Shadow like this are fascinating to watch because it's a song and dance with blades, essentially.
Yeah, it looks like there was no land drop there for Gary, so that Reality Smasher has to stay in hand, but he did play a Noble Hierarch, which could have relevancy next turn, as the Death Shadow is at a relatively precarious 6/6, just big enough to block a Reality Smasher, but not with an Exalted trigger. So let's see what happens now.
This is a pretty...
This is aggro.
There is a point where you have to start attacking, but this is a pretty aggressive attack. Yeah, and David keeping Bauble plus black mana to essentially Fatal Push the Thought-Knots here if it decides to go in.
Is there any thought process to doing that in your main phase? You get the card and
the important thing would be like
maybe hit a land or something.
Yeah, if you hit the land, that's exactly it. Like you should consider the odds of drawing a land since there's very high equity in David being able to play a land this turn, especially a fetch land, making Death Shadow just one bigger is good against Reality Smasher.
Oh, and there it is. Reality Smasher hits the battlefield for Gary Wong.
Yeah, and Gary, because Gary knows about the Fatal Push, he's not going to attack with all his creatures since that would literally be lethal.
Yeah, he would be accepting death at that point. A little early for that.
Yeah, and there is a line here where Gary could go, well, I want to attack with this Reality Smasher and accept the... Actually, wait, the Death Shadow is a 7/7, so there's no real good attack here. I think... David basically attacks with the Gurmag Angler because the Shadow's a 7/7, and there's no real incentive. Like, basically, Gary can't really attack through it. So yeah, he just passes the turn with Fatal Push, knowing that the Shadow like keeps everything kind of at bay here.
So Ochoa just with a litany of cards now. He gets a card off of Thought, not a card off of the Mishra's Bauble and his draw step. Now all of a sudden he's just got a stacked hand, though. It did look like he actually found 3 lands with those.
3 lands? Yeah, I at least saw 2. I saw the Swamp, the Blood Crypt.
I think he drew 2 Blood Crypts and a Swamp.
I believe the last card is another Fatal Push, or he might have drawn that. Yeah, you're probably right on the 3 lands.
Yeah, I see him at the back of his hand there.
Yeah, but he has another Fatal Push here.
Yeah.
So, interestingly, I believe one of those is a fetch land, but
oh, okay.
What is the card you actually want to target? Because Eldrazi Obligator, Noble Hierarch might be the more worrying card over Obligator. It's essentially David's at 6. So, by Fatal Pushing Noble Hierarch, you're not forced to use the fetch land. And yeah, here attacking with the Angler, putting Gary to 5 is really good. So yeah, I do like that David's line of being aggressive. So that like earlier on, it was very tense to do so, but he eventually got there. But I think that comes back to the decision to take the Thoughtseize. Basically, Gary should have aimed to stifle David's board development rather than protecting his own hand, and you can see this pan out. If Gary had taken the Death Shadow earlier, it would have been a lot easier for Gary to take over the board. So that's why I was surprised when he took Thoughtseize earlier.
Wow, what a turn for Ochoa. He does, in fact, take down the Noble Hierarch with the Fatal Push, but that also gives him that critical extra card in his graveyard to be able to completely tap out and play the second copy of Gurmag Angler. He is at a relatively precarious 6, but with 2 massive blockers, it feels like it's going to be extremely difficult for Gary to actually kill him this turn.
Yeah, let's see. The most powerful card that Gary could have access
Obligator?
to. Obligator.
Elf
no, he doesn't have enough mana for that.
Yeah.
Although that is a really interesting interaction. With 6 mana, you can Bloodbraid into Obligator.
Yeah.
And I believe because you're casting the card,
you can pay.
Yes, so that's a really cool interaction.
Well, he could hit a land drop and have that available.
Well, Gary already played the land here, but yeah.
Oh, okay.
Here's a Smasher and pass, which is really sad.
Oh, God, the saddest Smasher in the world.
Yeah, just a tiny tear, but yeah, here.
Indeed.
Yeah, all these threats are lethal.
Yeah, this is a double trade and a chump. Oh, and there's Temur Battle Rage.
Yeah, that's good
Ochoa
enough.
has 2 of those in his deck list, and that's plenty enough to get the job done. Ocho takes down game number 1 over Gary Wong with his Grixis Shadow list, and since we're in Time Walk Magic, we simply wave our hands.
Yeah.
And boom, we're in game number 2.
So yeah, here, Gary, you can see one of his sideboard cards in Relic of Progenitus. He's also going to probably board in those Chalices of the Void. Very good against Death Shadow. Deck plays a ton of 1-mana cards. Ochoa, he's going to look to board in those 2 Ceremonious Rejection. Even though there's Cavern of Souls, it's still worth the risk, in my view. Getting a Thought-Knot or a Reality Smasher, if they don't have Cavern, is super strong. Probably boards in the Disdainful Strokes are a closer call. The Kolaghan's Command and the Liliana of the Veil comes in, so David morphs into a tiny, just ups the curve a tiny bit, goes with Liliana, and the counter spells probably takes out the Stubborn Denials, which are not really good in this matchup. So essentially, if you want to see Gary win, like having a Chalice on 1 is a pretty strong indicator. Since David Ochoa has very few answers to that, there's only 1 Kolaghan's Command.
Mm-hmm.
If you want to see David win, like just a lot of what we saw last game, like turning the corner there, it's going to be like basically Gary needs to manage how he attacks David's life total.
How good is this relic?
It's very powerful here.
What is its primary role?
Its primary, there's 2 core roles. Role 1 is making Gurmag Angler very difficult to cast. Just incidentally, right? Like taking a card, then taking another card. Like it's harder to make Angler work. It happens. It's just a turn later on average. The fact that it cantrips makes it very powerful. So you're not getting you're also not getting incidental value out of your cards like this Thoughtseize, because you can't. Your Snapcaster Mage becomes worse because these incidental cards like your Fetch Land and your Thoughtseize get taken out. So your turn free Snapcaster is a lot worse. So it makes David's deck a lot slower. And that's totally fine by Gary, because if his turn 1, it allows basically Gary to interact with David on turns 1, 2, and 3. Essentially, the best thing that Gary can do, that he doesn't have access to it here, but is to go for this, would have been to have a Mana Rock with Relic of Progenitus, crack it to make sure that David has no options, draw another card, and make sure that he enables his turn-free Core Beater, a Bloodbraid Elf, or a Thought-Knot. Here, we saw Gary's hand. It's pretty awkward between that Wolf run, I believe, No red source. Pretty slow development. Although drawing, I believe he drew a Noble Hierarch here, so I think Gary's line here is most likely going to be Noble Hierarch, crack the Relic at end of turn in order to kind of get ahead on cards, make sure that he can deploy, give himself the best chance to draw a land / deploy a Fret next turn.
It's always interesting to see the timing on that because Gary can simply just sit here and keep activating his Relic of Progenitus every turn, and wow, it looks like he's got a second copy of it here as well. This changes things. But generally speaking, when you actually crack it can be really important.
Yeah.
And he's just going to say, okay, empty out your graveyard immediately.
Yeah,
he has left up the 1 mana, so that does indicate he's planning on cracking one of these, does it not?
Yeah, usually you don't really need the second Relic most of the time, so yeah. I don't know if that was a Hierarch. I might have misseen.
Oh, okay. Fair enough.
I mean, and the reason I say I might have misseen is because I would be very surprised if Gary...
He would have played it, right?
I would, it's very high equity to play it here. I mean, David could, of course, have a removal spell for it. But, I mean, if you're keeping a card like Noble Hierarch and afraid of playing it because of a removal spell, so, I probably missed
Noble Hierarch has one of those Born to Die tattoos. Yeah. You can't see it in the artwork, but...
Yeah. So I probably missaw the card, so I apologize for that side of things. But yeah, Death Shadow does not care about your Relics of Progenitus.
Right.
A really cool card that Gary has access as a 4 of in his deck to deal with this Death Shadow. Can you guess what it is?
What?
Here's a quiz. What kills Death Shadow and you can do nothing about it? I really hope Gary draws it because this would be amazing.
Know, some type of life gain thing?
You're on the right track.
But it just kills it?
Yeah, there's nothing that...
I don't know.
He did not draw his Grove of the Burn Willows.
Oh, sure. Can't interact with that. Yeah, the slow death.
Yeah, because it's a mana ability, it just dies. It's just like...
That's hilarious.
Yeah, you just add mana and it's gone. It's gone. It's gone.
Love that. State-based.
Yeah. But yeah.
All right, looks like Liliana of the Veil is the play for Ochoa. Gary did crack one of his relics. He also used Dismember.
Yeah, here for sure Gary has to crack this relic and get that land. Getting mana now is important. One thing is, that's really weird because I thought he had that talisman last turn, and I would have been 100% to play that card if I had access to it. Since it for sure makes your mana development work, and you can still crack the relic or dismember the Death Shadow. But yeah, so it's a bit. This has been a really difficult sequence from Gary's perspective, but I'd be really surprised if he doesn't go for the Matter Reshaper here. I guess the Ancient Stirrings, you're not going to win games where you don't get your land, so I think it's totally okay here to aim for Stirrings, try to get a land, and then play the Reshaper after that. So I think this is better because you really need to hit that land drop this turn, and this is the best way to do it. It's very unlikely that Gary wouldn't hit a land, and in that case, he's going to be too far behind anyways to win. So it's correct to go Stirrings, land, Reshaper, which is a resilient threat against Liliana, and allows him to cast Bloodbraid Elf or an Obligator from his hand next turn to make sure Liliana can ultimate.
They both look quite good here. Yeah. Let's see what the Ocho comes up with. You can see that we've sped up our footage just a little bit for you here.
Yeah.
That's because the next round of action is, players are huddled around, not only the coverage booth, but also where the pairings are going to go up. It won't be too long before we're in round number 4. What did he hit here?
He hit the only card that makes him think while Matter Reshaper's ability finishes resolving. Since he has to name a creature.
That's funny.
So it names Elf or one of the Eldrazi's. I think in post-board matches, you care a lot less about Bloodbraid Elf being uncounterable, so unless you need the mana, you should almost always name Eldrazi, since it makes a card like Ceremonious Rejection very bad.
Yeah, we saw him name Elf in the first game, but that was because he could cast his Bloodbraid Elf without taking any damage because he had a Pain land out.
Yeah, here, Noble Hierarch's a little late to the party, but we'll still take it.
Sure.
Yeah.
Bloodbraid Elf is going to attack, and this makes me think we're going to see a fatal push from David Ochoa.
Yeah. And this is where you can see why Bloodbraid Elf is so good. It's like, okay, well, I'll trade 1 for 1, but you still get this incidental value. And it might be a Noble Hierarch. It might not look like much, but Noble Hierarch means that next turn, the Eldrazi Obligator in Gary's hand, well, that can steal a creature. Well, that essentially gets to kill Liliana because it can attack with 4 power if it decides to steal a Death Shadow, for example. And
And Ochoa can't just simply... Yeah, this is... Yeah, it's interesting because that has to be one of the worst hits for Bloodbraid Elf at this point, and it's still fine.
Oh, it's totally fine.
And think about the good stuff he could have hit, right?
Yeah, like an Obligator.
If he hit an Obligator, he would have just been able
Reshaper.
to...
Any like creature is basically good here.
Right.
The only card that would have been awful would have been Chalice of the Void, and even then, that counters Mishra's Bauble. It's not totally horrendous. Yeah. By the way, we missed earlier that the first card that Liliana discarded was Gurmag Angler, and you can kind of see the effect of Relic earlier in the game, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, you were wondering what's Relic good, how does it work against Death Shadow? Well, that Gurmag Angler in the graveyard, that would have been in play otherwise.
There you go.
Or Exile Zone, rather.
Here we go. Thought Not Seer now from Gary Wong, looking to fight back against Ochoa.
Yeah.
And he's going to see another copy of Liliana the Veil, another Gurmag Angler, a Death Shadow, and a Disdainful Stroke. Oh, boy. That's a hand.
Yeah, that Disdainful Stroke, that was the card. I think Rejection's too efficient to not run, but Disdainful Stroke is a much bigger question mark because it's a lot harder to counter something with a 2-mana spell, especially when they still play Cavern of Souls in their deck. So Disdainful Stroke is like a lot closer as the sideboard option. I think here Gary is taking the right card in Liliana. Essentially the one in play is not really too much of a threat. All the cards in David's hand, apart from that Disdainful Stroke, are kind of relevant. So I kind of like taking the Liliana here so your Thought Not Seer survives. Even though David could get that Angler in play just by discarding with Liliana the Disdainful Stroke and casting the Angler by exiling all 4 cards. And obviously the 5/5 being awkward. Interestingly here, David isn't going for the Death Shadow, although he could have. He probably realized at some point that Grove of the Burn Willows was a thing that existed. And I kind of agree. Oh, well, I'm not. This I disagree with, actually.
You don't like running it out there?
I actually believe that David should have run out his Angler here. It was the right, unless David drew an interaction spell, which I'm just trying to think of which one it would be here. I would have honestly gone for the Angler because it naturally blocks the Thought Not Seer. And yeah, this Lightning Bolt here on Death Shadow, I'm very surprised.
Yuck.
Yeah, I'm extremely surprised by David's decision to run Death Shadow rather than Gurmag Angler here, and he got really punished for it.
Wow, what a swing back in Gary Wong's direction. He's got to be thrilled with the way this last turn sequence went. And look at that, he just wins the game. Oh, my. Wow, that was a massive disaster for David Ochoa down the stretch there. Yeah. But he's going to get another shot at it.
Yeah, something he did concede before, like lethal damage was presented, so that makes me think that David saw something like a Reality Smasher on top of Gary's deck. Because otherwise David would have had time to draw a card and see what happens, but he probably saw a Smasher and realized he couldn't take it back down. It's a bit of a surprise concede still. I probably would have played it out for a tiny bit more. I was a bit shocked that David decided, you know what, we're done here. Maybe they were pressed for time, but it seemed like a pretty early concession.
It did. Yeah, he had potentially a couple of turns.
Yeah. I guess at least one turn. That's why I'm surprised. Although he might remember there was an Obligator in Gary's hand, so an Angler. That's probably why David ran Death Shadow, was because he knows Gary has access to that Eldrazi Obligator. But at the same time, like, if they take the Angler, what is that, like 7? I guess it's lethal. That's why David didn't run the Anglers, because of that Obligator. But you're in a rock and a hard place. Well, it's really tough.
I would say I would probably prefer to not be dead.
Yeah, that's why you run a Death Shadow. There's also the line that you don't play either creature. But yeah, I guess you play the Death Shadow out there. So yeah, I was a bit surprised, but then I remember David knew about Gary's Obligator, and that would have been exactly lethal. So
sure.
That's where we were at, and I believe Gary had enough mana because of that Noble Hierarch. Yeah, actually the Noble Hierarch died, so I'm trying to remember how much mana Gary had, but I believe it was 4. So, yeah, that game... Yeah, then the Cavern's 5. Okay, yeah. So
I don't know if you noticed, but they're also playing another game now, Eduardo.
That's fine.
Yeah.
There's so much math involved.
I love it how you're just grinding through game number 2. I was just sitting here staring at you like, wow, he is still going. This is interesting.
Yeah. Well, I mean, in this game, both players are doing what they want. Gary hits his Eldrazi Temple, which is by far the best reason to run this Eldrazi package, is that 2-mana land. And David shows why he runs that Death Shadow deck with Gurmag Anglers, because it's a turn 2 5/5 while getting to cycle some cards that Mishra's Bauble, that Thought Scour. Interestingly, a Relic on 1 would have just been enough to stop the Gurmag Angler here, but it could easily not have been with like a Street Wraith for another Bauble or something.
Sure, but instead he actually gets a turn 2 Gurmag Angler, and Gary Wong is going to have to settle for the Relic a little bit late here as he plays 2 copies of Ancient Stirrings, and the best he's been able to do is just the Relic, so he's going to take a thumping here, boom, knock you down to 15, and this is a big turn here for Ochoa. The shields are down. He can follow up with any number of great threats.
Yeah, here Gary really wanted not to necessarily play a Stirrings on 2. The Stirrings on 1 is great, but the Stirrings on 2 is not. You really wanted to make a turn 2 threat once you get Eldrazi Temple. That Reshaper would have been perfect. The Obligator that he had in hand, it was his option. I believe it was better not to run it. Not so much for the stealing value, so to speak, but the free 1 haste is just not excellent at this point.
So Obligator's going to hit the bin. No graveyard for David Ochoa, but he does have Liliana of the Veil and a Gurmag Angler facing down. Effectively no board state at this point from Gary Wong. So this is a turn where Gary's going to really need to do something. Ooh, another Temple.
Yeah,
he would love to get he only has the Obligator.
I
not bad. Not bad.
I believe that this can this not be paid with Eldrazi Temple?
It's activated abilities, but not triggered.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so he
the wording on Temple, it obscure. You know, like I always have to reread these cards.
That's how Modern is, though.
Yeah. So like Eldrazi Temple specifically says activated ability, so that would not work for the triggered ability of Obligator. Interestingly, Gary deciding to just put the pressure that way rather than running out the Reshaper and waiting a turn. Because Gary could have waited a turn and been able to use Eldrazi Obligator's ability on something like Gurmag Angler. But instead decided to punch the Liliana down to 1 loyalty. And that was an interesting decision because normally you prefer running out your non-haste creatures. So I think I would have preferred the Matter Reshaper here into the Obligator with the hand that Gary has currently. This Fotsy should be taking Hazaret. Can't let that thing hit the table. That's I really love that addition. You know, when they go like Cavern of Souls, God.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah. Here, David attacking with the Angler, putting the pressure. Yeah, this Liliana, like David realizes that the Liliana is going to be extraordinarily hard to defend, so he'd rather put on pressure with this Gurmag Angler rather than try to defend the Liliana of the Veil. He decides, I want to put pressure because the minus ability against Matter Reshaper is just not what I'm interested in, so I'd rather deal 5 damage and lose my Liliana here. Or inducing Gary into a trap with that Snapcaster Mage that has been otherwise neutered by these relics. So I really like here the play by David, like basically making Gary go into the Liliana of the Veil and flashing in Snapcaster to protect her. I really like this. Putting pressure, dealing with Gary's threats. And look, Gary could have played those Noble Hierarchs pre-combat. Wow, if he had played these Hierarchs pre-combat, Snapcaster would have been a non-issue.
Wow, that's insane.
Yeah.
Full punishment, and now Ochoa is still sitting here, and he's attacking.
Yeah, and this is... I have really liked how David's been playing this game. I really...
Ooh. Yeah. Ochoa looked at his hand, maybe feigning a Temur Battle Rage here.
It's very close. Putting your opponent to 1 has less value when you don't run the card Lightning Bolt.
Right.
Yeah. So I think here it's fine. It's also, if he doesn't have Temur Battle, he does have Temur Battle Rage, so that was a really good body language spot from you, Marshall, actually, on that one. But the Fodnauts here. Gary's going to know. He's not sure if it was a bluff, but he'll know.
He'll know now.
Yeah. But I think Gary...
Probably not great news.
Yeah, Gary should have played those Nobles pre-combat and should have played the Reshaper before the Obligator. I think that sequencing would have been more powerful against what David does. But yeah. And here David gets that little bit of value by casting Temur Battle Rage just to make sure he goes in the graveyard rather than in exile. You know, you never know. With the land he has in hand, that allows him to cast top deck Angler. Otherwise, he wouldn't be able to.
Okay, so
there's a fetch line, but it's good to have value like that. I really like small plays like that give you tiny bits of equity as matches go on. So that was a really it doesn't seem like much, but it's actually a really good spot. Yeah.
More cantrips here for David Ochoa. He found a Street Wraith and then a Mishra's Bauble.
Yeah, and he has access to a fetch land. So here, he's deciding if he wants the card or not. This is a really cool interaction. He decides this card is not good enough, so I'm going to shuffle it. I'm going to draw another random card. And then, David gets access to 2 fresh cards.
Man, the amount of value you get out of Mishra's Bauble is like... It's concerning me a little bit, Eduardo. That should not be free, all of those things that he just got. And sure, he had to have a fetch land to make that work, but still.
Yeah.
Makes me a little...
Uneasy? The one interesting bit of sequence that David misfired on here, he could have easily bobbled on Gary's turn to avoid like another Thought-Knot Seer taking the card.
Oh, interesting.
There was no real need to draw the card right away either. It wasn't like any card that David drew would have been really worth using right away. So in empty hand situations like this, I don't like... I prefer the Mishra's Bauble being on something like Upkeep unless you're going to use the card.
Because if you draw a creature, you can't cast it anyway. Ooh, here we go.
Yeah, Smasher here.
Smasher for the trade.
Oh, man. That would have been
this.
That would have been an amazing Snapcaster top deck, though. If Snapcaster Mage had been drawn, he would have been able to Temur Battle Rage on defense and get rid of the Rally Smasher. So, yeah. Yeah, Fotsy's just losing 2 life looking at this lonely mountain. And, David forced to pass back against 2 Thought-Knots. Bloodbraid Elf.
Wow, the beats are starting to get laid on pretty strong here from Gary Wong. That's a lot of power he's got out.
Yeah. Dead card from Bloodbraid is totally fine.
What did he get?
He failed to get a Dismember since it wasn't going to be very relevant, and that's it. Yeah.
All right, and that does it. Gary Wong wins 2-1 over David Ochoa in our Time Walk match here from Phoenix. Welcome. Thanks so much for joining us. And we've got more live Magic lined up in just a moment. We'll be back right after these messages.